we have to start with night one. Obviously, Joe, you've already talked a little bit about your impressions of being there and getting there early, but take us through it in greater detail. What really jumped out at you but before kickoff? What were the conversations like that you had with people there? It's a hard thing to distill,
Yeah.
but take us through it.
No, it was honestly a great night for Australian football. And I think I'll get to the stuff on the pitch in a moment, but just pre-game, I saw jerseys from all around the country. Was speaking with Mariners fans, families who've flown down from New South Wales, the entire family to come watch the games as well for the whole weekend. Plenty of people, making the trip down, making a whole weekend out of it, getting to 3-4 games this weekend. The conversations with a lot of the South fans in the stadium as well were, they were quite optimistic, even though they've had quite an underwhelming season in the NPL, but they've recruited well, and we saw that, come to fruition on the pitch with some of those signings having really standout performances. But then also with Sydney Olympic, they had a lot of travelling support down, and that main grandstand was really buzzing for that game. The blue, the white, a little bit of smoke in there at certain points as well, which we can get behind, I think, or at least I can. I won't speak for you two. And then as for the game itself, Ali Ogla, new signing with an absolute bomb to kick us off. I think that's a fantastic way to start the competition. South then really came back into the game, kind of took it on their own. And then the star man, Ryan Foyts, with an absolute worldie finish. I saw someone liken it to the movement of James Rodriguez in 2014 at the World Cup in Brazil. And I do see a shadow of that, obviously without the takedown and the volley, but the actual shape.
Pretty important detail of that goal, but I see your point.
No, definitely a key moment. But look, all in all, I can't really praise the efforts of all involved to get to this point enough. And the fact that South, I think, looked really, really good, getting off to a great start in the competition, and honestly probably should have their eyes set on topping this group from here on out.
Yeah, I mean, the opening goals, the quality of goals that Sydney Olympic scored helped the cause of this game no end. Because as we talked about, Lockie, last week, like, if there is one game that people who are not going to be ride or die followers of the Australian Championship were going to watch, it was going to be this one. In many respects, this is like the bedrock for what's going to follow. And it did that perfectly. I mean, Jordan Lampard's goal to win it was unbelievable. But, I thought the crowd of, it wasn't quite the 10,000 of the Australia Cup, but what did you sort of make of the 6,600 turnout, Lockie, at the game? There was mixed opinion from some sects of the population, not necessarily the ones that I operate in, but I think there was maybe a certain contingent that liked to, pick holes in South Melbourne. But I feel like it's a figure that does have to be put in perspective. Generally, and these are not connected tiers as yet, but you expect a scale down at a lower level of competition, right? So for anything that is outside the fully professional footballing sphere to be hauling in 6,600, I don't think we can sniff at that, even if there might have been some who expected 20,000 people to be lining the gates at Albert Park.
100%. And I think people's opinions on this will largely be decided around whether they're viewing this as a step down from the A-League or a step up from the NPL. And when you consider, the multiple cameras we had at every game, the expert commentators, including yourself, congratulations, by the way, outstanding call on the weekend. But from what an NPL game is, stepping up to the kind of quality of product that we received on the weekend is really, really cool. So people who have been following these clubs day in, day out will have noticed that uptick. And obviously a crowd like 6,800 and the NPL game, apart from the odd South Preston game, is pretty much unheard of, right? And a final series, of course. So from that lens, that's outstanding. This is the uptick from the NPL going into the championship that we looked for. And my biggest takeaway from this game, and I've told a couple of people about this and they feel the same way, is that this game did not revolutionize Australian football. It was just exactly what we want a second tier to be. It was passionate fans in a boutique stadium with clubs that people really, really care about, showing great football and having great moments. And at the end of the day, when we're looking forward to the future of what we want this competition to be, that game on Friday night was exactly it. It was just the perfect example of what a second tier can be. And to bring this back to James Rodriguez's goal at the World Cup, I'm a big believer that a goal's virality or popularity in the years to come has a big dependency on the cameraman shooting on it at a particular angle. And the way that you kind of see James's eyes roll down towards the ball to shoot for goal is a big reason why that goal is so popular. The little behind the goals angles of Lampard's winner in the 88th minute or whatever it was, just the social media guy and seeing the ball bend past and just into that far post. And then some of the photos taken, our mutual friend Antonis has a really great one of, Lampard pointing the finger up to the crowd and celebrating. What a memorable moment it was. I think that moment is just going to be etched in this competition and that club, South Melbourne's history forever. And it's really, really cool. It felt like when that ball hit the net, 3-2 in the dying moments against in a rivalry so storied as South versus Sydney Olympic. That moment, that was what all of those 6,800 in the crowd were waiting for, and particularly for South fans for so long. So I thought it was really, really cool.
You've made my job as a host very hard, Lockie, because that was a spiel so dripping with threads to pull on that I'm not actually entirely sure which one to yank first. But I thought your point about perspective is such an interesting one, because it links perfectly into what you said about the broadcast. Isn't it interesting how your perception of something can change just based on the way it's packaged? Someone who's maybe not the hardest worker in the room, but the best seller in the room, can get further than the person who's the biggest talent but can't sell themselves. And those little things that you've mentioned with cameras behind the goal, even with the difference that is made between a 1-camera locked off NPL shoot and a 3-camera SBS on demand game, makes such a difference. You develop a greater level of appreciation for the skill of effectively semi-professional players, just because you can see more. You can see that minutia. When you see something with one angle in an NPL game, even if it is impressive from that angle, it's impossible to appreciate it in its fullest extent. These little tiny bits give you the chance to appreciate the players, the football, but also the venue. I mean, I'm biased because I'm a Victorian, but these drone shots over the top of Lakeside, and you realize what a brilliant. Now I know the running track divides opinion, but you realize what a brilliantly positioned venue it is on the sort of the banks of the city. I honestly, I was welling up. I was nearly like emotional with homesickness at that one. But the other bit in terms of the crowd and the expectation point is that one of the things that is going to make or break this, and like this is what we're interested in this podcast, right? Like is taking this long term, is what it means for the future. And the interesting part is whether a 6,000 crowd is something that is the high watermark, or it is a 6,000 crowd that builds on something. Like, I'm interested in your perspective on this on the ground, Joe, because you would have come across plenty of Sydney Olympic fans, no shortage of South Melbourne fans, but probably a fair share of neutrals too. Did you get much of a sense that, this is the kind of event that those neutral people, those people who didn't have a dog in the fight, would A, want to turn up to again to, but B, bring a few more mates next time? Not that it needed to be a bigger crowd, but we know these clubs have all got baked in fan bases that will turn out for them. But as with every level of Australian football, really, it's that next level. It's the hauling other people in to make it a wider network. Did you get the sense that there was enough there for that to happen and for this to sustain itself?
Yeah, look, I do think we will see this sustained. Obviously not to the level we saw in that opening game. I think it's a massive event. You're going to get people like myself travelling down to the games to get around it. But then come round 2, a lot of those people are going to go home and they're going to take their friends out to the games back in their home state as well. So whilst not necessarily, I don't think South Melbourne are going to be pulling in upwards of 6,000 for every home game, I don't think anyone who went to this game would be opposed to returning. I think it was a great experience on the night. I think there was great experiences all around the country from what I've seen and heard. And I do believe that there's a strong chance that the momentum will continue to build throughout the tournament as we start to see some of these other teams go head to head. This weekend, I believe we got Preston versus Canberra, Croatia in Canberra. I think that's a massive game for Canberra to get around as a community. And those type of matchups are going to be littered through the remainder of this group stage before we get on to finals games, the knockout stage, where we're going to see some really big games start to take place. And that momentum just continue on building like we've seen in recent years. And in NPL land, I think there is something big brewing here. And whilst we might not be getting that upwards of 5K every single round, I do think long-term, the sustainability factor could be achievable if we all as a community, continue to keep supporting these clubs, these grounds in our own backyard, and then also migrating for the big ones like that opening game at Lakeside.
And I think the other side of the coin there, Joe, is not every, you are right in that not every game will be 5,000-6,000, but not every game has to be.
No, of course not.
Not every game has to be. I even look at something like again, it does come down to what you set your expectations for what this level of football, what a more consolidated, longer term league format of this level of football could look like. But I even look at something like 1,000 people at Magic Park, which we'll talk about later, and think that's a great turnout for an NPL club in the northern New South Wales. A team who probably, with the greatest of respect to them, wouldn't have been going in to this tournament with the greatest expectation of succeeding, of progressing, of necessarily being there longer than the 6 weeks. And the other interesting part of this, Lockie, it's like a double-edged sword, is you think, what's the appetite going to be when these teams have to play each other again in 3 weeks? I can't think of a Sydney Olympic fan who isn't going to have at least the slightest bit of interest in a revenge mission when South Melbourne come to Cogger, and I'm sure there'll be a few South Melbourne fans willing to come along for the ride.
Absolutely. And as much as we all want that home and away league over a full winter season, one of the pros of having this 6-week Champions League format into the knockouts is it's actually really easy to hold that narrative. And it's only 3 home games per teams in the groups. So if you miss a game, you're missing out on 1/3 of, what this group stage is. If you're a fan, that it's going to go along to home games. So whilst I kind of agree with Joe, they'll probably see a little bit of a dip off the 6.8K. That is not a bad thing. It's about holding it on the way through. And I will say I went around in the second half and I sat on the far side of the ground. And when Lampard scored that goal, apart from the small section of very committed Sydney Olympic supporters who travelled, almost every single arm in that far stand went up in celebration straight away, which tells me that there is a very strong following there. And moving forward, absolutely, the narrative of, okay, we got you this game, the other team is going to get us back, that's only a couple of weeks away for Sydney Olympic supporters. It's not like a regular season where it's a couple of months ago and you have to remind people what happened. So as much as, it is this kind of shorter Champions League format, I think that really is one of the advantages. And I think it's absolutely likely that, we'll see these crowd numbers continue to settle and then form a very solid base. And then before you know it, we're getting into the knockouts, and that adds its extra layer of appeal onto it as well.